afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this Clinical and Community Practice Grand Rounds. This is a series offered out of the Office of the Associate Dean, and theoretically CCPGRs run the last Wednesday of every month, except when we have them on other days. And we do that sometimes to accommodate schedules or whatnot, to have some flexibility. But today it is my great pleasure to welcome to Columbia University School of Social Work, Mr. Jonathan Mintz, who is the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, and he's been so since 2006. During his tenure, Commissioner Mintz has been extremely productive and tackled large-scale enforcement and litigation work that's focused on ending industry-wide deception practices in the consumer marketplace and significantly increased the volume of New Yorkers who are protected and educated about their finances, such as debt collection and tax preparation. And he is leading the nation's most comprehensive campaign to boost awareness and uptake for the Earned Income Tax Credit for working families and individuals. Commissioner Mintz has launched the department's Office of Financial Empowerment, and this office is the first local government initiative in the nation aimed expressly at educating, empowering, and protecting those with low incomes so they can build assets and make the most of the financial resources that they have. This initiative has been profiled in The Economist, The American Banker, American Public Media, and it's a really unique and important way of approaching poverty reduction, trying to increase financial stability and asset building by leveraging powers and opportunities of the municipal government. Mr. Mintz has a law degree from Cornell University, and he also holds a master's degree from Bank Street. And I thought very interestingly in his biography is that in addition to practicing medicine, in addition to being on the law faculty of Roger Williams University, he also was a second grade teacher at the Little Red Schoolhouse in Greenwich Village. So welcome, Commissioner Mintz.
I promise I won't make you all sit on the carpet and build with blocks or anything like that, although I love blocks. It's very nice of you. Your introduction is very kind. The awkward thing is I think we wrote it. And and the work that I get credit for in the introduction is actually done by the people who are here. So I have to give them their due. No, I'm really thrilled to be here, and I appreciate you all taking time out of your lunch time breaks to come hear a little bit about the work that we've been doing. And I think the very fact that I have this opportunity to talk to people like you underscores this interesting new world that we've embarked on over these last few years at the Department of Consumer Affairs, trying to take a very new approach to the way in which we use government to help change people's lives in the sphere of their finances. So let me give you a little bit of history of how we got there and what I'm actually talking about. And I want to walk you through sort of how the mayor and my team and I have been thinking about this work and growing it and pushing it out, and the role that Columbia is playing that's so helpful and exciting, and talk to you a little bit about the class that's being offered here. There'll be a shameless pitch directly following my remarks, and then maybe hopefully we get a little bit of a chance to talk, which is the part that I'm looking forward to most. So DCA, the Department of Consumer Affairs, is one of several city agencies. We are largely a regulatory agency. Our mission revolves around ensuring a fair marketplace for consumers. So we do that in a number of different ways. We regulate dozens of different industries. We enforce truth in advertising regulations. We have inspectors and judges and lawyers and communications people, et cetera, et cetera. I'm told by one of my deputy commissioners who's here, Fran Friedman, who's an alum of this school, that our mission statement is a social worker mission statement, and that right away should make you love us. It's that the Department of Consumer Affairs empowers consumers and businesses to ensure a fair and vibrant marketplace. Apparently, she snuck in during our strategic planning session the your social work ethics. So I think that's exciting, and of course, it's very much what we're about. As I say, the Department of Consumer Affairs is a regulatory agency in the spectrum of work done by the city to help people fight poverty. We didn't used to be part of that mix. It's not the way that when you organize City Hall by its deputy mayors, and this deputy mayor does health and human services, and this deputy mayor does economic development and all of that. We were always in the economic development sort of economy business part of the portfolio because we were out there helping and hammering businesses to get it right when they treated their customers. Something very interesting happened about 7 years ago when the mayor put together a blue ribbon panel to think about new ways that the government could be smart about fighting poverty. And I'm sure you all have been subjected to many reports and panels and all of that, where you tend to hear some of the usual things. This panel had a bunch of really exciting and innovative ideas, I'm told. I wasn't a part of it. Again, we were the enforcement folks down the road. But one of the things they said was unbelievably tired and usual and expected, which was, gee, there ought to be more financial education. Everyone says it. No one knows what they're talking about when they say it, but everyone thinks it's a good idea. And it's always going to show up in people's recommendations about how to approach poverty. But interestingly, the mayor and Linda Gibbs, who's the deputy mayor for Health and Human Services, when they were going through the panel's recommendations, didn't just gloss over this recommendation. They said to themselves, oh yeah, more financial education, that's a good idea. You know Mayor Bloomberg's background. He's a great believer in information and the role that it can play in empowering people's lives. And so the question for them was, well, which commissioner do we call, to beat over the head and say you need to be doing more financial education? And it occurred to them that nobody in local government does financial education. That's not really what government does. Government does direct services. If you're homeless, we're going to find you a shelter and try to get you assistance. If you're hungry, we're going to be the conduit to various public assistance opportunities. If you get in trouble, we will arrest you. But just want to remind you. But the idea that government is out there sitting down with people and saying, let's talk about your finances, let's figure out how to clean up some of these messes, let's figure out how to start to build some savings and all of that, it's just not what government does. There's a thriving nonprofit sector that I'm sure you're all very well aware of that for decades and decades have been approaching financial education and asset building and doing some really terrific work from within their own spheres. So I'm the one that ended up with a late night email saying, well, you all have done this outreach campaign for the EITC, which was really just sort of an accidental piece of work that we were doing, some important work, but not really part of who we were. And why don't you think about what you all could do to do more financial education? The other clear signal that I got from the mayor was, as always, if you're going to get additional resources, if you're going to be using existing resources, it needs to make a difference. You need to be doing something that makes a difference. And so we started asking ourselves, well, what is unique value add on the part of city government in this world that is so traditionally, completely occupied in the nonprofit sector? And we started thinking a little bit not so much about financial education, but more and more thinking about people's financial circumstances and where the stress points were in regard to their stability. And we quickly realized that the education part of the mix, with all due respect to a learning institution, that the education part of the mix was sort of farther down the list of where they were in trouble. We have 800,000 New York adults that don't have bank accounts. 800,000. We have 1 million New Yorkers who qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit, and there are about 175,000 of them that still don't know it and claim those dollars. We have people that are being preyed upon all the time by debt settlement companies that are saying, just give us $100 and we'll fix your life. We have people being harassed by debt collectors, often for debts they don't owe. And so we started thinking about the lives of consumers or New Yorkers in the financial services marketplace, and thinking a little bit about who we were at Consumer Affairs, what we thought we could bring to bear with city government. And fast forward a little bit, we created something that we call the Office of Financial Empowerment within my agency. The Office of Financial Empowerment sought to approach this question of helping people with their financial circumstances, and we identified 4 very clear pillars that we were going to be focusing our work on and trying to make a difference. The first of which was sort of in our DNA already, and that was consumer protection. Of the 55 industries that our department directly regulates, and we indirectly regulate all industries, but directly regulate and license 55, we license debt collectors. If you're a debt collector and you want to collect from a New Yorker, no matter where you are in the world, you need to get a license from us. You need to follow our rules. You need to answer to our mediators if you screw up, and we call you on the phone and say, you're pursuing a $3,000 debt, prove they owe it, prove this is the right person, et cetera, et cetera. We've got 47 states and 9 countries worth of licensees in debt collection alone looking to come after you. We license debt collectors. We license used car dealers. We license process servers. I don't know how many of you know the role that process servers play. If a creditor is going to come after you and bring you to court for not paying a bill, they're going to file some paperwork with the court, and the only way you're going to know it is when a process server serves you with those papers. Process servers are not known for being all that great about service, and there's this wonderful expression called sewer service. Anyone ever heard of that expression? Sewer service is a little, entry into my world. Sewer service is where a process server will toss the papers in the sewer and then swear to the court that they gave you the papers. And so you never know that you have been sued by a creditor. You don't show up at court, obviously. The creditor wins because it's a default. You're not there. The bank, the judge seizes your bank accounts, freezes them, destroys your credit rating, and you are in a world of trouble. So process servers are really a key player, unfortunately, in this world of people who get in trouble with their finances. Employment agencies we regulate. There was a real constellation of our license categories where we thought to ourselves, there really is a way to think differently about not just here are the rules and we want to make sure you follow them, but thinking a little bit more proactively about how are the practices of these industries impacting on people who get into trouble. So consumer protection was the obvious first pillar for us. It's who we are. But then the 3 other pillars were safe access to banking services, savings and other asset building opportunities, and then the 4th was financial education and counseling. I want to zero in on the 4th category for now, but we've done a lot of really exciting work in some of those other categories. We've got tax time savings programs. We have negotiated with banks and credit unions in the city to offer free bank accounts where you're not going to get screwed by overdraft. We have really come up with some really great ways to leverage the city and leverage the fact that we run so many programs along with our sister agencies. But when it came to financial education and counseling, we said to ourselves, as I said before, what's the unique value add? What can we do? Well, I can tell you who we weren't going to be. We weren't going to be the new kid on the block that came out with the Bloomberg curriculum and said, we've decided that we're entering this field. We're big bad government. Everybody's heard of Bloomberg. He's famous and rich. This is what we think everyone needs to know. It's not who the mayor is. It's not who we are. It certainly wouldn't have been interesting. And with all due respect to some of you who have labored hard on websites, including my own staff, who needs another website? Instead, what we said to ourselves was, well, first and foremost, let's figure out what array of services are already available in this city from nonprofit providers and ask ourselves, how can we help them? And so one of the things that we were able to do is take this incredibly powerful tool that at this point we all take for granted, but a few years ago we didn't even have it, which is 311. Right? Do you remember the blue pages in the yellow in the phone book? If you needed help from the government, you had to thumb through these blue pages and figure out, well, how would this be? Which department? All of that. 311 got rid of all of that. You all probably don't even imagine or what it like. So many of you, you're so young. But I digress. I'm about to turn 50. So one of the things that we were able to do is pull together all of the existing providers in the nonprofit world of financial, free, decent, at least, financial education and counseling services, and put them into a network and use 311 as the incredibly simple, universal way to connect the public to whatever services were already available. Now, that doesn't seem like all that big a deal, but it was huge because one of the problems that our nonprofit friends were having is they couldn't fill their seats. They would beg, borrow, and fundraise to get the ability to try to help people. And many of you, I'm sure, know how difficult that can be to raise money and to keep that money going and to bring on the right staff so that you're offering those services. And so one of the things we want to do is to make it as easy as possible for them to be able to reach as many people as possible. So now you can search online or call 311 in 172 languages, 24 hours a day, and say things like, I'm looking for a budgeting class in Russian. Is there one? Where would it be? I'm looking for debt relief services where somebody speaks Bengali. Does it exist? The ability to make those connections seemed important. The second thing that we did is we turned this group of providers into a community. And to our great surprise, they weren't already. So we were able to start to talk to them about best practices, new threats on the horizon. We pull them together every quarter, and we're all able to teach each other. That's always important. The third thing we did is what I'm really here to talk about, which is we created something which are now known as financial empowerment centers. So here's what we knew. If, as government, we were going to step forward to the public and say, hey, are your finances in trouble, call 311, we needed to be able, and this pressure is really wonderful pressure, we needed to be able to do more than say, I hope you find what you need. And in particular, what we knew, and this is what you all know, is when somebody's in trouble, a class doesn't fix their life. A website doesn't change their world. A great brochure is not going to tell them how to make the specific decisions that they have to make with the bills in front of them and the court papers or whatever it is. If somebody's actually in trouble, they need to sit down with a professional and get help. I know you all agree with that, or you wouldn't be spending all this money on this fabulous program. So we also knew in pulling together this network that the availability of one-on-one counseling was almost non-existent. There was one really terrific provider that had raised the money to have somebody every other Friday for 3 hours. That was really the extent of where somebody could go if they wanted to sit down with somebody that they could trust, who would sit down and look at their papers and talk about things like, what's the crisis in front of you? Are there benefits that you might be missing? You've got these court papers, let's unravel it. You've got this credit card bill for $1,000 that has somehow mushroomed into $3,700 because of fines and fees and all of that. What are we going to do about that? So from the beginning of understanding the world of what was out there, we knew that the key piece was missing, and that as government, we just couldn't look ourselves in the mirror and say that we were somehow making the world a better place by telling people to call 311 for the one thing that we really weren't able to give them. So then we had to ask ourselves, well, all right, it's a big city. There are a lot of people in financial trouble. If we're going to try to put together quality one-on-one counseling services as government, we're going to have to really ring a couple of bells. The first bell, and the one that's most relevant, I think, to you all, is we have to make sure that the quality of the service being offered is high. If you're going to tell people, hey, Mayor Bloomberg thinks that's a good idea for you to go to this center over here and sit down and get advice about your finances, we can't screw it up. And when you're talking about people's finances, it's dangerous because you really can screw it up and you can get people in a lot of trouble. The second thing we needed to be able to do is we needed to be able to offer these services at scale. And scale in New York is, scale. So we couldn't build a model that was so difficult to replicate that we could only sort of pat ourselves on the back and say, we helped 40 people last week or last month. It's not enough. The need is too great. And when you step forward and say you're answering the need, you need to be able to answer it. The third thing is that we needed to be able to have a consistency across the system. So we needed professional delivery of these services. We needed a model that could be replicated at scale. And we needed to make sure that that replication involved apples to apples experiences. And so we put together very rigorous protocols. What is a counseling session? What data are we tracking? What measurable outcomes are we expecting from our contracted counseling partners? And where is that data so that we can constantly be drawing upon it? Now, initially when we did this, we raised private money. And this is the way, if you've paid attention to some of this, this is the way that Mayor Bloomberg has really done a lot of his more innovative work in the city, which is go raise some private dollars and try it, prove the case, and then sort of talk about whether or not it's something appropriate for the public to be paying for. If you fast forward from this creation of this financial empowerment center model, and interestingly, we created our first financial empowerment center. The very first pilot was up in the Bronx. We worked with Phipps as our partner, and it was going well, and it was showing a lot of results, and it was exciting, and we were counting up the number of dollars literally reduced when our counselors were picking up the phone and calling creditors and all of that. And we were in the beginning of evaluating it, and it was all exciting, and then the economy went to hell. And so, as I say, we were sort of in the right place at a terrible time, and the mayor turned to us and said, this is looking good, people are in trouble, ramp it up. And so for the next couple of years, still with private dollars, we quickly went from 1 center to, I think, initially 5, and then they started mushrooming. Fast forward a couple of years, and here's what we've done. In, I guess now, is it 3 years, Ishing, or 4? We have had over 30,000 counseling sessions for about 20,000 clients. We have helped our clients reduce their debt, 1 counselor at a time, a couple $100s at a time, by about $10 million. Is that right? I know it's, I hear it's almost 10 million. We have built savings with our clients in the neighborhood of $1 million. We have opened up, I forget how many bank accounts, but there's a number, and a host of other services. Our ability to say to the mayor, when you make this investment in high quality counseling, this is what you get for it. This is literally how people's lives are better when they walk out of a counseling session. This is literally what happens when they come back for a second or a third counseling session, and the way their credit scores have changed over time. Then you make a very powerful case for a service that is worth its weight. And so now, just about 2 years ago, when the mayor was struggling to cut $5 billion out of our public budget, he decided to publicly fund this new service. So financial empowerment centers in New York City are now part of the baselined public budget. That might not sound like a big deal to all of you, but it's huge. It means that it has sort of reached that notch of this is what a city ought to be offering. It has reached that notch of even when times are tough and we're closing senior centers and doing all these other really difficult choices about how to spend public dollars, we are going to make sure that people had access to high quality professional counseling. One quick side note. I have used the word professional a lot. I want to talk about that for a second, and I think that's relevant to you all. From the beginning, it was very important to us that what we were building was a field of professional counseling, that it was something so far from well-meaning volunteers in a church basement trying to help somebody deal with their mail to people who had been trained not just on personal finance, which is important and good for all of us, but trained on how to be a financial counselor, trained on how to understand the particular issues and challenges of people with low incomes, trained on people's consumer rights in the financial services marketplace, trained on the psychology of money and the role that it plays in people's ability to absorb help and take it. And so from the beginning we said, let's not just make this an in-house training that we're proud of. Let's make this real. Let's make this a path toward professionalism. And so initially we started working with the City University of New York, who helped us develop the initial curriculum and offered the class, which is now a 3-credit class. And then came the most magic moment for us, which is when Columbia agreed to offer it in your program, both as a course and as a field placement. It's completely thrilling for us, and it's thrilling for us not just because you all are great and the school is great and the name is great and all of that, but because it represents this vision for what society ought to expect and honor in this critical service of counseling people about their finances. And as we fast forward from that first financial empowerment center in the Bronx to a citywide network of now publicly funded financial empowerment centers, at the same time, this professional, one-on-one, municipally designated counseling model is starting to be replicated across the country. Cities across the country are raising money to offer our model of service. Universities and colleges are using this curriculum and variations of this curriculum to train counselors in credit-bearing courses and field placement, hopefully soon, opportunities elsewhere, with the idea that this is something government ought to do, this is something unique that government can do for its residents, and that this service is so important that it ought to be part of a professional career path for people who care about the lives of people in front of them. Something else has happened in the evolution of this public service. And that is that we discovered that in addition to the impact of the work itself, in addition to being able to quantify how much debt is reduced, how many bank accounts are opened, how credit scores are shifting, et cetera, we also started partnering with some of our sister agencies in their programs and inserting some of the work that we were doing across the spectrum of our financial empowerment work. For example, I don't know how many of you remember a few years back the mayor did a program called the Conditional Cash Transfer Program, where he was trying to leverage anti-poverty behaviors by literally paying people every 2 months if they did X, Y, or Z. It was a model that he borrowed from Mexico. It was controversial but interesting, and it's certainly a big effort. Well, one of the things that we knew is that these people who were going to be part of this study, and I think there were 5,000 of them or 3,000 of them or something like that, we knew that a huge portion of them were going to be unbanked. And we thought, well, you're measuring the impact of money. You're going to hand them a check, and they're going to take it to a check casher. What's wrong with this picture? And so it was one of our early efforts of where we said, well, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the mayor's name as much as I can, and I'll flash my badge or whatever I have to do. And I'm going to see how many banks and credit unions I can get to offer a safe account. And I'm going to insert bank account opening into the registration process for this other program. And sure enough, we had a population, 47% of that population was unbanked when they showed up because they wanted to be part of that program. And by the end of the registration period, only 3% were unbanked. Everyone said yes. They got this bank account. It wasn't going to screw them. The city had told them it was safe. We actually had several providers. They could pick whichever one they want. It was the NYC Safe Account, I think is what we called it, or Opportunity Account or something. And we realized that this work, it's great that we got more people banked, but what was really exciting is we had actually helped this host program better achieve some of its outcomes. Fast forward that light bulb now several years, and we have a series of efforts that we refer to as the supervitamin effect. So that's you probably have that in front of you. It's, we have our first 3 reports that we put together in a compendium. And we started recognizing, and this is the thing that you all know, and I think this is the magic of why our Columbia partnership has always made so much sense. When you're dealing with people because they're at risk of losing their home, when you're dealing with people because they're having trouble escaping domestic violence, when you're dealing with prisoner reentry, aging out of foster care, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, financial instability is a powerful force flowing through those clients' lives. They're not what you're necessarily trained to deal with. They're not necessarily what you're resourced to deal with. But if you want to make sure that somebody who you spend all this time and effort and money in a workforce development program, if you want to make sure that they keep showing up for their job, then you're going to want to make sure they've got a little reserve of savings so that if they have to hire a new babysitter or if their car breaks down or whatever it is, they can keep showing up to this job that you just worked on. Domestic violence, the first or second, depending on which study you take a look at, greatest reason women go back 7 times on average is because of their finances. And if you're not able to figure out how to address their finances, you're not really going to get to one of the core factors in getting these people help. So this idea of this supervitamin effect, that our work was great in and of itself for what it was supposed to be, but that it was this really interestingly useful tool for other public programs, the sort of the classic social and human service programs that were out there, really motivated us to start thinking about and piloting and studying how that worked, where it worked, how you set it up, so that it could flow as part of the delivery stream of those services. And if this interests you, I hope it does, you could thumb through this report, look at the executive summary of the first one. It'll give you a little bit more of a flavor of this. And that's been very exciting for us. It's been very exciting for the asset building world, which is always trying to figure out how to reach a broader audience. But more and more, it's been very exciting to our fellow commissioners who are now knocking on our door saying, I can't get these people out of shelter. Can you help me? My counselors are frustrated because we don't know how to tell these people what to do about the fact that their abuser stole their financial identity and they can't open a bank account. And so that's been very exciting. I mentioned earlier that we were doing national replications of this work. We created a couple of national iterations of who we are. We created a coalition of other mayors that are doing this work, and that's called the Cities for Financial Empowerment Coalition. About a year ago, we created a nonprofit arm to help other cities do this as well as a funder, and that's called the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund. And recently, the CFE Fund announced this very large grant for cities and mayors who wanted to open up these financial empowerment center models. And we said to them as part of this grant, don't just raise your hand and say you want money so that you can sort of have counseling out there. Here's what you have to do for the money. You have to find a local educational provider who's going to offer this professional training on an ongoing basis in credit-bearing classes, and you have to identify these different integration opportunities of where you're going to make sure that these services are more than just lovely standalone services, but start to become the fabric of the array of solutions that you're offering in your human services world as well. We had 48 cities apply for that experience, which is very exciting. Ultimately, we were only able to fund 5 of them. But in each of these 5 cities, we will be experimenting with different versions of this kind of supervitamin integration. I recently gave a lecture in St. Louis with Professor Sheridan, who probably a lot of you know of his work. Say again? He was? He didn't even call me. That hurts. And one of the things that Professor Sheridan said, which I thought was so great, is he said, social work actually, we used to be the ones that cared about people's finances. And he told this wonderful story. I don't know if he talked about filling bathtubs with coal and, sort of creating cooperatives with clients to try to help share on coal expenses. At any rate, the social work handshake is a natural. And it's just a very exciting, it's a very exciting way for us to take this vision that we have and that we've been exploring and starting to replicate and really underscore the idea that this is what we ought to be doing for people who are in trouble, that we can do it and that we can do it at large scale. So I'm really excited about your interest possibly in pursuing that experience through your program and in learning more about the way that cities like New York are trying to do it. I want to stop for a minute before I take any questions or comments and ask Monica Copeland, who's going to be teaching the next course, I believe, here, to talk a little bit about the class in what is shamelessly a pitch. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I just want to thank you all for coming and taking this time to learn about this great work that we're doing. It's groundbreaking work on a local level. To do it in New York is amazing, but then to also see the work being spread nationally is also really wonderful. We are teaching a course. The Office of Financial Empowerment has been granted an opportunity for the second time to teach a spring class, and so it's actually in session now. It takes place from 2 to 3:50 p.m. on Wednesdays in room 1109. So I'm letting you know so that in case you're interested in potentially coming to sit in this week's session, if you have time, you're welcome to join us. And then if you want to sign up and register, please do so before drop add. So this course is called Personal Financial Management and Financial Counseling Skills. And so you'll be learning content that you would, from a practical sense, about your personal finances, whether it's credit, debt, banking, bankruptcy, insurance, benefits, all of those practical matters. But then you're also going to learn how to potentially integrate this in future settings, because we think this information has, as Commissioner Mintz really eloquently explained, it fits in so many of the sectors that you're already in. You could be clinical, you could be direct practice, you could be serving in an AGPP practice, SEA, policy. There's room for this content and room to share it with your clients. Just as an example, when I was at Columbia in 2004 and 2006, one of my field placements was at Pathways to Housing. And so what I really liked about that placement, what was so fascinating, was that they believed in the housing first model. And so that's just one example of a strategy to deal with homelessness. And so they believed, we know that these clients have a lot of issues, whether it's their mental illness, they're homeless, and just a series of substance abuse issues. But the housing first concept was that let's place them in housing first and then address some of these issues. And so I use that as sort of an analogy to some of this financial social work information, because sometimes a client can't concentrate on a lot of these other issues that you might be seeing them about, a therapy session, family issues, an at-risk youth, but they can't concentrate because of the money stressors. And then as social workers, we'd like you to be able to provide quality referrals, because even if you can't do it yourself, at least you'll know what the city has to offer and where you can direct them, that they won't be preyed upon further. So anyway, you can tell I'm very excited about the class. I hope you'll consider, if you do want to just check it out, it's from 2 to 3:50 on Wednesdays, room 1109. And then the second pitch I just want to put forth is we'll also be at the Field Placement Fair. So on Monday, February 4th, we'll be there from 2:30 to 4:30 in Lerner Hall, and we'll be offering 2 field placements at the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Financial Empowerment next school year for SEA students. But this past year we had almost one of each, a policy, an AGPP, and an SEA. And so we have found that it's been very helpful to have those students, and they're here today if you want to talk to them. But I just wanted to say I'll be at the Field Placement Fair. If you're first year and you were considering and that's of interest, the class is a prerequisite. So we hope that you take the class first. But if you're just curious and want to know more, we're happy to answer those questions. And then lastly, if you're a second year and you just want to know about career opportunities in this field, I'd be happy to talk to you about that as well, because it's there's a lot of options and a lot of different directions you can take it. So, all right, thank you so much, and we'll take questions.
Are there any questions or comments? Yeah.
If you were, let's say, approached by a large bank who wanted to become involved in this process, in addition to providing bank accounts, what would you suggest to them on how to get involved?
Who do you work for? Well, banks have actually been very constructive partners for us. I mentioned that our early financial empowerment center model was privately funded. We had banking funders in the early days. When I went to negotiate the bank accounts that I talked about, we've now done that in several different contexts. Um, Here's how I do it. What I have done is I have literally reached out to every bank and credit union serving the New York marketplace, and I tell them what I want. I tell them what the program is that I'm going to be using it for, who the population is that they could get. And basically what I do is I offer up government as a broker. I say I'm going to have this population. They're going to need bank accounts. I want them to have bank accounts. This is the kind of bank account that I need. And any and all of you that are willing to offer us that account can be on our list of folks that we're trying to hook up. What I don't do, and you'll notice what I don't do, is I don't say to people, oh, you need a bank account, you should go get one, right? You all know enough about behavioral economics, that's not going to happen. I don't say to people, oh, my sponsor is X Bank, you should go check out what they have, because the truth is, X Bank probably has some crappy accounts, and I don't want to put people in harm's way. So we are very aggressive with our banking partners about what we need, but we are offering them something significant, which is government brokering of customers. And so that model is also a model that we started replicating nationally. We started a movement called the Bank On movement, which you may have heard of, that is now all over the country and tries to use different approaches to connecting banks in safe ways to people that we need. So that's the way I work with banks, is I'll take their money and I'll take their good accounts and I'll take their account representatives at registration to help open up those accounts. Does that answer your question? Banks have been great. I mean, there are some that aren't, that have multiple voices, and some of them have some lousy accounts, and banks aren't always all that popular. And part of what I offered in our brokering is the ability to say, look, people don't always trust banks. The reason 800,000 adults don't have bank accounts is not because they're dumb and they've never heard of banks. It's because they don't trust banks. So let's put together an account that people can trust. Let me put my imprimatur on it of the city as an account that they're not going to regret. That one account that I mentioned that first time we did it in that opportunity program, 2 years later, like 90-some% of the account holders still had the account. That account hadn't been closed down because of overdraft fees. It hadn't gotten messed up. It had been simple and straightforward, and people didn't regret it. So that's our approach to working with banks. It's really important. You can't help people in the financial services marketplace by sheltering them from the marketplace. You have to show them the right way to navigate it. Good question. Yes?
I don't know if I need this. I'm very loud. Thank you. I agree.
Quiet down.
I think the marriage of social work and financial literacy makes complete sense. I was wondering, have you partnered at all with Department of Education? I feel like financial literacy within a younger cohort. I mean, we were chatting in terms of, they prey on college students, for example, so even getting people before graduation. That was my first question. And I was just curious about gender differences. Was there, when you first rolled this out, you talked about saving the $10 million savings. I was just curious if it was disproportionately men or women.
So I want to answer the latter question first. We do know a lot about the demographics of our clients at the Financial Empowerment Centers. They are predominantly women. Probably not surprising, right? As the father of 2 daughters, and they are predominantly women, and we could get you, might be interested in more, but they are predominantly women. They are predominantly single mothers, and so they're out there getting the help that they need, right? And your first question about the Department of Education, it's a question I get a lot. It's a great idea. If we run for a 4th term, I'll take it on. Just kidding. We're done. It's hard, the Department of, I know the Chancellor very well. It's, they have 1.1 million students. They have a huge list of things they have to master and do, and so cracking that nut has been a little bit more difficult systematically. There's a lot going on here and there. My interest has been, as you probably could tell, in systems. And so I've really been trying to figure out what the right approach to that is, and New York is harder. Now, my I mentioned this coalition that we started, this national coalition. Our co-chair city is San Francisco. And San Francisco did something very interesting. They have a much, much smaller cohort, so I'm jealous, but it made sense. And they created something called a kindergarten to college account. And they are literally opening up bank accounts with, depending on your income level, $50 or $100 for every single kid in kindergarten in the public school system. So there are, and you'll find this interesting, and as a former teacher, so do I, using the fact that people have these accounts as a way to integrate into early versions of curriculum. Before, it was a little awkward sometimes to talk a little bit about money and bank accounts when you didn't think that most of the kids in your...
And Harlem Children's is actually doing some of that in some of the local
yeah, of course.
elementary schools.
Right.
They're including that. And
Yeah, there's...
somebody who came out of criminal justice and worked mostly with young people, the issue of trusting things or
Yeah.
even financial stability is such an integral part of the conversation.
It's certainly, you know, and I would just add the notion that I talked a little bit about before with my consumer protection hat on, which is just, as you mentioned, college students. I mean, these are just preyed upon.
I mean, if I didn't have
That's right.
education from my parents early on, I mean, it's something that most of my peers at that time were just in debt
Yeah.
before they graduated.
Right.
Because of the
We did a large campaign recently. In fact, I will say this is, I feel like I could take every other campaign we've done over the last 11 years, and it still wouldn't add up to the impact of this one campaign about proprietary colleges and schools and student loans. What was the name of the campaign? Know Before You Enroll. Thank you, Fran. And the impact of this, I mean, for months and months and months, I had folks asking me to come on radio stations and TV shows. I mean, everyone wants to talk about this because student loans are just, not that you all have student loans, I'm sure you all got full assistance, but
yeah, I have one from here.
there you go. Other questions? Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to also acknowledge Fran Friedman for bringing the project to us, and Yisheng, who has been working from the ground up, Monica, of course, and yourself.
Take full credit for them.
They're just amazing and wonderful, and I was skeptical and all, but I'm totally on board now. So there are 3 things that I just want to mention. Number 1, we can probably help you with the schools, because I just came back from a very exciting meeting with TC. So we can talk about that later.
Right.
The other thing is that we can probably also help you reach a national audience if you're interested in certification programs. We have a means by which we could do that. If people want the Columbia imprimatur, let's talk. The third thing is if you want to do any work internationally, we also have that as a possibility.
You're my new favorite person. That's great. That's absolutely. That's perfect. Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
I work for, or I'm an intern at a transitional living facility for homeless families, and we actually do send them to the Office of Financial Empowerment, but only our employed clients. And from what you're saying, it sounds like we should probably be setting up all our clients initially.
I think that where our sweet spot tends to be in people with incomes. You know, there are services that are really geared purely toward benefits enrollment and that sort of thing. But I think we tend to be at our best in the way that you're currently making your referrals, where we're able to sort of help people make the most of the incomes that are coming in. That's the segment that we're trying to capture primarily. I think that makes the most sense. Now, that having been said, when you have people in trouble, if you have people being harassed for a debt they don't owe, for example, they should be calling 311 and let one of our mediators, you know, let the public services, let those other public services, you know, be part of the picture as well. Okay. Other questions? Yes.
How have you overcome the stigma of calling 311 for help, like calling the government for assistance, financial assistance?
It's a great question. You know, Fran always has her social worker hat on under her deputy commissioner hat, and you know, when we did a lot of public advertising. You know, we own the subways these days. You know, in terms of ads, and just as one example, and we thought a lot about how we captured this, unfortunately, almost universal sense of frustration with finances, in the sense that there was no light at the end of the tunnel, or, you know, whatever the metaphor would be. And I think we had actually a pretty good early campaign. that spoke to lower middle class, not necessarily just lower income. And I don't mean to make too much out of like which stock models you use for an ad, but I think we did pretty quickly tap into, and remember also, this is when the economy was really going to hell. And so our problem wasn't so much people with lower incomes who were a little bit more predisposed to knowing that there's help available and where is it, and sometimes actually quite adept at finding that help. But we were starting to think a little bit about people in the lower middle class who were now finding themselves in trouble and who are definitely not used to thinking that government service, free opportunities, is something they could do. So that was part of it. One of the unique powers of government is our bullhorn. So we were able to produce all sorts of marketing opportunities and figure out ways to get free, earned, what do they call it, earned press, whatever, earned PR, whatever it is, free press, get on TV shows and get on radio shows and start to announce some of the results and that sort of thing. We did a wonderful early experiment with the Daily News where for a week we had this call center, I forget what we called it, but and every day there were articles in the Daily News that were sort of saying a bit, look, we took like 400 calls today, here's an average call, and all the elected officials show up and they take a call so they can get their picture taken in the paper. And really just try to continue to mainstream it and to have, in the way that the mayor talked about it when I could get it onto his bullhorn, to talk about just the sort of, again, the universality of the fact that this stuff gets complicated and you need help when it gets complicated. And then the final thing I'd say to answer your question is, and this is again with my consumer protection chops, which is just that people knew that they were being preyed upon. They knew they needed help. They were really, there was no question that everyone was telling them that they had the magic solution for only $120. And so I think there really was a lot of pent-up relief. And it didn't take long before our counseling sessions were 3 weeks booked out, which is pretty darn exciting. Yeah.
In thinking about the quality of service you're looking to provide in the one-on-one counseling sessions, I'm wondering what the experience has been in working with low-income folks where long-term financial planning has not exactly been something that's been something available to them necessarily, and so in thinking about setting up bank accounts, introducing the idea of long-term planning for folks where that hasn't really been the case. Just want to give you an example. Monica Copeland mentioned Pathways to Housing. I oversee a family support program for a housing first model as well. And we recently had a number of the tenants living in our buildings who got their first apartment. They were really excited, looking really positively towards the future, and then the holidays hit, and they wanted to buy their kids really nice gifts and give them a great Christmas. So what did that do? Put a bunch of them into rent arrears. They're now in debt. So I'm just wondering what the experience has been in trying to introduce a new way of looking at money when that hasn't been the case.
It's a great question. So I want to answer it in two ways. The first is, I mentioned that one of the other pillars of our work was on building savings. And we, from the beginning, had to counter the myth that people with low incomes, even people with high debts, wouldn't and couldn't save. And so we developed this really interesting program, which is called Save NYC. It's now also being nationally replicated through the White House. It's called Save USA, where people were able to segregate part of their EITC returns, their Earned Income Tax Credit returns, right on the split tax form. And if they saved it for a year, we were matching their money. And we've been having amazing results. So one of the things that I would say is that when you engage people in the right way, with the right products, with the right behavioral economic cues, people want to think about their futures, even when their presents are stressed. The second thing, and more directly answering your question, is that people don't almost never come into a financial empowerment center and say, hey, I'd like to think about the future. Hey, I'd like to build some savings in a college account. It's not usually why people come to us. Usually people come to us because they're in trouble. But the beauty of, I think, the way this has worked is we don't just say to them, oh, you're hearing from this debt collector? Let's sit down and let's look at this bill and let's call the debt collector, and hey, that's great. What we do is we say, let's start with a financial health assessment. Let's figure out the whole mix. What do you have coming in? What do you have going out? What's going on? So that you have the seeds to be able to say, okay, now let's take a look at this one issue with the debt collector. Let's show you how to fix it. What else can we fix? You mentioned that you're also behind on this payment. Let's take a look at it. Are there any fees that are piling up? Why don't we give them a call and put you on a new payment plan? And so once you start to show somebody, and this is why I was talking a little bit before about tangible help, once you start to show them that there is tangible help, then suddenly the floodgates open in so many cases, and people start to realize it's worth their while to start to take on some of those other pieces. And our counselors, who are very well trained, know that part of what you're trying to do at the same time is build the seeds of, you know, putting together some savings, putting together a bank account, whatever the right next steps are for those clients who are, while not presenting with that goal, who tend to often leave with that goal. So I think that's how you do it. You snare them with something helpful, and then you sucker punch them with something long-term helpful. That's not the expression we use in our training materials. Bait and switch, sucker punching, yeah.
I'm from the New York Asian Women's Center, and we're one of the domestic violence programs that our counselors are receiving the financial empowerment counseling training.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and
how's it going?
It's been very encouraging, but we're very early on in kind of incorporating this type of work into the services that we regularly provide.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering whether there have been certain settings or certain populations where you're seeing this super vitamin effect particularly effective.
Well, read my report. It's a great question. In fact, we wrote a whole report about it. You know, seriously, you know, we have made some real mistakes that have been very instructive, where we have tried to insert the services at the wrong moments. You want to get people when they're in crisis, but only at certain points of when they're in crisis, and then only in certain crises. And you want to find the right kinds of partners. You know, the partnership that you mentioned is one that frankly took us a little bit of time to get going. Some marriages are a little harder to broker. That one's going great now. We're very excited about it. So when you take a look at that, I think it's our very first report where we sort of lay out our quick lessons, and it's about finding the right partnership. It's about finding the intersections of sectors that get that their stress points are impacted by the financial stress of their clients that they're not otherwise already dealing with. You know, some of our more successful efforts to date have been with people in the homeless services arena, where people are getting renter's assistance and other ways to try to keep them in their homes and not falling into shelters. But we're having an increasing series of good experiences, and I think you'll like the report. I hope. Thanks. I hope that experience is going well, that you're having it.
It is.
It's a big one. It's the one I talk about a lot, actually. Good. Yes.
Thank you for this very enlightening presentation. I work with a faculty member here, Fred Sawamala. He's a professor and a researcher, and he's been doing financial inclusion research for the past 10 years in developing countries, primarily sub-Saharan Africa. So it's just really interesting to listen to the U.S.-based trajectory of how this has unfolded, because you've pointed to many similarities that are taking place in Africa as well. For example, the distrust of banks, the myth that poor people don't have any money to save, don't want to save. Right. But what we found in the research is that low-income people save a higher proportion of their income compared to middle-income people. So that's very interesting. Yeah. My question to you is...
It's really exciting,
yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
My question is, we do research, and as you mentioned, the difficulty in working with banks, we don't really have an incentive for the banks other than reminding them of their corporate social responsibility. So I'm wondering, you know, like what strategies you might have in working with banks, and how do we kind of present a long-term business case? I mean, this is probably a long conversation.
No, it's a great, I have an answer for you. When one of our first research studies was on the marketplace of the unbanked, And we did something beyond the expected. We didn't just go out there and count how many people were unbanked. And we didn't just go out there and whine about the fact that there were some poor neighborhoods that didn't have brick and mortar banking institutions. We looked also at the demand side. We took a look at what the unbanked were doing for their financial needs. We started quantifying, like, I think, this was several years ago, I think in the community we studied in the Bronx, Mott Haven? Melrose, sorry. In Melrose, I think we quantified that there were $19 million being spent at check cashers. And so part of what I did, you want to talk about a marketplace, I literally went to the boardrooms of banks and said, don't you want this $19 million? I want you to have it if you're offering a safe account. I don't want it wasted. Now, maybe not 19 million, maybe with those, maybe it'll just be 14 million. But you know, so part of it is, I think, our strategy was about very much a marketplace-based strategy, which is this money is being spent. People are cashing their checks. People are sending money orders. They're sending wire transfers. They're engaged in the financial services marketplace. They're just engaged in the fee-based fringe version of these services, and we'd like you to bring them in. That's one approach. The second approach I mentioned a little earlier when I talked a little bit about the role that government can play in brokering. You know, one of our accounts, we were pushing out, this is our summer youth employment program, we were pushing out $30 million to 50,000 young adults. That's a lot of money. And I was shameless about it. You know, we've all gotten to know each other well enough. You're probably not surprised. I was shameless about it. I went to the banks and said, don't you want this? Don't you want these clients? Well, this is the price to entry. You know, you want me to sell your account? It's got to be this account. It's got to have these terms. I'm going to sell as many of them as each of you is willing to offer, and you're welcome. Now, it served my purposes as well, but served theirs just fine. And banks are really interested in that. We're currently, we're about to release, I don't think we've released it yet, a really interesting study that we've done around the financial service needs of 3 different ethnic communities. That was funded by the banks. The banks want to know more about, you know, for their own purposes, for their social goodwill purposes, but they're profit-making institutions. They want to know how to capture these clients. And I'd rather have them capture them with safe products, which are increasingly safe, thanks to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and your president. But I think that's how you do it. I think a market-based strategy is very smart, and certainly the DNA of the Bloomberg administration. Yeah. Last question, and then you have to get out.
I wanted just to add a footnote that Professor Sewamala, whose work she's talking about, was Michael Schradin's doctoral student.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Great. He's wonderful. He
So
didn't
it all
call me,
comes around.
as we all now know. But yeah, I think Professor.
Well, on
Schwab-
behalf of everyone here, thank you so much. This
Pleasure.
was absolutely enlightening and delightful, and we really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.